Hi, everybody. Very warm welcome to all of you for this a little bit different bi-weekly teaching today in Manifest Nirvana. And first and foremost, a very warm welcome to you, Jon. Thank you for joining us today. So today is a little bit different, and with traveling, and therefore Jon and I will have a conversation today about spiritual awakening. And I'm looking very much forward to it. Jon and I know each other for quite a few years, not closely, but he is one of these people where I feel like even though we don't know each other so closely, there is a deep soul connection and a connection in our spiritual longing and in an interesting way. I always feel like a brotherhood in how we live our spirituality. So I'm very much looking forward to our conversation today, Jon. But before we start, as always, a little bit of how we do this. Today we will go for 90 minutes. So Jon and I will probably talk for an hour. And then we will open up for questions. And as always in our bi-weekly, you can write the questions in the chat box of the Zoom window, and then either Vincent or I will read them out loud. Vincent is our host today. Thank you, Vincent. And then we can answer the questions and also open your microphones. And secondly, as always, I find it very helpful if everybody can turn on their cameras. There is not a strong reason to not do that, just because it's nice to see who is here, whom we are sitting with. And yeah, that's it from my side already. So welcome, Jon. Let's just dive in. And Vincent, you want to spotlight Jon? Oops. But anyway, Jon, if you could probably say a few words about your background and where you are coming from, where you are at now, what you're doing, because some people probably know you and others don't. And then I would like to start with the question and would actually ask you to probably define for all of us what your understanding is of radical awakening versus evolutionary awakening, because I know that this is a distinction that you are making, and I feel very compelled to talk about this distinction because we in Manifest Nirvana have a similar distinction, and it's probably interesting to find out where the synergies are and where potential differences are and what we can learn from each other.
Beautiful. Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me well. Yeah? All good. Thank you. Yeah, Daniela, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. It's a pleasure to be invited by you. I saw you have your cat there that you're looking after. I just want to acknowledge I have my 4-year-old son with me in the background watching some cartoons right now. I think he's going to be fine with that. But if at some point in the conversation he needs me to switch a channel for him or something, just letting you know.
Sure, totally fine.
Dealing with that. So yeah, I feel really grateful to be here with you all. I'm a big fan of Andrew's work. I'm someone who I really appreciate you and what you stand for, Daniela. To speak a bit about the background that I come out of. So I've been someone who's had a passion to study and practice the most powerful approaches to transformation and awakening that I could get close to in the course of my journey and in the course of my life. I'm someone who's had a deep, deep passion to break through to what is most true and to then do my best to live from that place. And I'm someone who, probably like you, has found themselves in a world where there's so much beauty, and there's also so much I find profoundly heartbreaking. And I feel like my drive to awaken and to establish an anchor of my life in that which is most true, to then participate rightly in whatever this thing is, was really fueled by feeling devastated and heartbroken by the world I found myself in and the way we human beings are with each other and with ourselves and with the earth and so on. So yeah, my path has taken me through various kind of modes of practice and teachings and so on. I guess the ones that have had the biggest impact on me are the Trans-Himalayan teachings that started off with Theosophy and people like Helena Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, one of my teachers, Bruce Lyon. Then also Tibetan Buddhism and Dzogchen have been a place that have been very, very dear to my heart. And Wilber, for instance, Wilber's work around integral theory, which I feel, for instance, the evolutionary enlightenment work is really, I feel there's a definite connection there. And yeah, and then there's been a load of work that I've done around how to just really safely, comfortably, truly, alively be in a body. And be in a body that feels vital and most of the time not run by my traumas, and able to be vulnerable and attuned and present with the earth. So these are areas that I've hung out most. And I'm also someone where I've had an unconventional path in certain ways. I feel like I've been given the privilege to experience a large spectrum of the human experience. I had a reasonably privileged upbringing through to 5 years of homelessness and drug addiction in my late teens and early 20s, through to working with projects dedicated to social transformation on the basis of spiritual awakening, through to now running, I run a international spiritual community called Avatara, which is dedicated to the kind of spirituality and practice that we're going to talk about today. Plus, I have initiated the beginnings of a transnational political party called Singularity, which is dedicated to, an approach to politics that starts with the inherent unity of all life. Definitely the most adventurous thing I've ever tried to do in my purpose journey. And I also mentor soul-driven leaders, beings that I call soul-driven leaders. I'm passionate about leadership. I'm passionate about an evolution of the way that we human beings relate to leadership, so that we start to, more and more, we have people who are leading in the world as a state of being and pioneering into creating the kind of world our hearts really long for. So that's a bit about me. And I live in Berlin, and I have a little 4-year-old boy, and I have a really sweet family life in that regard. So awakening, what do we mean by awakening, and particularly the difference between radical awakening and evolutionary awakening? So the terms radical awakening and evolutionary awakening are two terms that one of the streams of teaching that I just mentioned that I've spent a long time with, the Trans-Himalayan teachings, which grew out of Theosophy and so on, in their most recent iterations, they speak about this distinction. And my view is that it's just one version of a distinction which a number of different streams are making. So for instance, Andrew has spoken about being and becoming. And Wilber in integral theory talks about, states and structures. And there's radical awakening, evolutionary awakening. I think that, there's various other iterations of that distinction, which I've noticed different spiritual teachers and paths make. In the form that I hang out with it, radical awakening, which I guess you could call the kind of traditional awakening of the East, relates to awakening to our true nature as the one ultimate reality that transcends and is arising as the entire universe. So the traditions of the East generally posit, ultimately all spiritual traditions, but the teachings of the East have a particular slant on it, that there is an ultimate reality, that there is an ultimate ground that is the non-dual basis, the non-dual foundation for everything that's arising. And actually, the radical truth is that that ultimate ground is the true nature of our ever-present consciousness. And that if we dive into the exploration of what is this consciousness that's simply present now, that is what's, you know, the field in which all our senses are having the experience that they're having, actually nothing transcendentally beyond in some, you know, exotic spiritual state somewhere else, but really, truly, radically, just this consciousness that is here now. If we spend time to let it reveal what it truly is, it reveals itself as an ultimate, infinite ground that is emptiness, pure being, radiance, consciousness, ecstasy, energy arising as the entirety of creation. So radical awakening, that's the, you know, I guess how we could relate to radical awakening. Evolutionary awakening, well, that ground is arising as a multidimensional evolutionary cosmos. And that multidimensional evolutionary cosmos is emanating a Jon, and is emanating a Daniela, and is emanating you know, all the other beings that are here, plus the other, you know, 8 billion of us on this planet, plus the other, whatever it is, you know, 100 billion suns that are dancing in this Milky Way, plus the whatever 2 trillion galaxies that have been charted so far, you know, in our increasingly extraordinary universe. So evolutionary awakening is awakening to the different levels of what's going on in the expression of the ground, in the expression of that absolute reality. And to bring that down to something that's a bit more graspable, you know, for instance, in the teachings that I spend a lot of time with, well, we understand that, okay, what's Jon? Jon, relatively speaking, absolutely speaking, Jon is the ultimate ground, just like we are all the ultimate ground. But relatively speaking, Jon's a personal self that has a body, and that has an emotional field, and that has a mental field. And Jon is actually a soul that's going through multiple incarnations. And even deeper than that, there's a breath of spirit that is the breath of that one, that is the core, at the core of that soul, for instance. So there's different levels to each of our relative being. There's also different levels to humanity. There's just different levels to, you know, the earth. There's different levels to this cosmos that the evolutionary process is happening within. So yeah, you could say that, you know, a distinction we make sometimes, which is a crude distinction and actually needs a bit more scrutiny, but you could say like the evolutionary awakening piece is more the gift of the West. And I think, you know, that the nuance in that is really, you know, some of the traditions of the Middle East. I think if you look back at, I've been fascinated for a really long time at the spirituality of ancient Egypt, for instance, really trying to understand what the mysticism of ancient Egypt was. And I think there's good evidence that it was very evolutionary. It was about waking up to different levels of who we are and then embodying that on earth in a way that hopefully is in service to our society. And I think that, you know, if you look at that flowered through the Neoplatonist movement. It also flowered through the Abrahamic traditions. Really, in my view, the essence of the Abrahamic traditions is how to show up as a soul who is open to the divine will of God and expressing that as love and service in the world. And, you know, so that's, in my view, that's an evolutionary path. It's not a radical transcendentalist, let's just go to the ultimate ground and you know, primordially awaken first. It's an evolutionary movement. And I think that is also, you know, you could say really the same thrust that it has been behind the emergence of things like Western liberal democracies and the emergence of the scientific method and that whole piece. there's an evolutionary thrust that is at the heart of all of those. Hey, we're on our way somewhere. We're on a journey somewhere. Can we unfold more of what wants to come through so that we can build something better? One distinction that the spiritual teacher Adi Da made once, which I find a useful distinction, is you could say the traditions of the East are more kind of alpha focused. They look to what is the primordial source that is the ground and basis of what is everything that's arising, whereas the evolutionary focus is more on the omega. It's where are we going, you know? Yeah, that's a little kind of distinction around radical awakening and evolutionary awakening. And I think, yeah, part of the extraordinary and exciting for me truth of our current time is that we live in a world where there's enough flow of information and contact between practitioners and innovators and creators of different traditions and pathways that we're more and more getting what is the type of wisdom that's been cultivated by human beings and communities across the planet for millennia. And sometimes there's a bit of a postmodern, sometimes it's popular in kind of postmodern thought to say, oh, well, we've just got all these different pathways, but they're really all just the same ultimately, you know? And the truth is, if you look a bit deeper, they're not the same, you know, and that's exciting to me. They're not the same. You know, Vedanta Hinduism is not the same, is not going to the same place as Amazonian shamanism. Western psychotherapy is not going to the same place as the soul work of the Abrahamic traditions. Tibetan Tantra is not going to the same place as a bunch of other places, you know, so, but that doesn't mean it's all just different and there's no coherence. It means that actually each of these traditions, in my view, has been cultivating something profound about a particular aspect of human nature in the awakening process. And the opportunity of our time is that if we can put that together, we get to start to envision and perhaps even embody and experience a fullness of what it means to be a human being that has never been known before. So for me, that's what I'm really excited by. You know, can we, whatever we're talking about, whether it's states and structures or being and becoming or radical awakening and evolutionary awakening, can we put these together to start to actually pioneer into what it means to be awake, evolutionarily online and embodied and in service of what's happening in the world in a way that is, yeah, it allows us to see the blossom of what it means to be a human being in a way that is radically new.
Oh, yeah, that's beautiful, Jon. And before we go to how we can really bring this into the world and what it means to then live an awakened life, I would like to add one component that I feel when I was listening to your talk that made me reach out to you about these distinctions. And I listened again today, I was realizing that there is an interesting difference not to the radical awakening part, the being part, to the primordial ground. I think that's absolutely the same in our teaching, in evolutionary enlightenment, in Andrew's teaching. But there is a significant difference that I wanted to discuss with you, how you see that in your framework. And it is that in Andrew's teaching, the becoming part is actually not the structure stage development in integral language, or not the growing up and the cleaning up, but it's a distinct awakening to becoming that has an as absolute quality as the being is an absolute dimension. So when we are making the distinction between being and becoming, both of these awakenings are awakenings to an absolute dimension, in a way to the same non-dual absolute dimension, but at the same time distinct. We don't want to mash being and becoming as if this was all the same. No. The primordial being before time is something totally different than the evolutionary impulse, as we call it, that animates the world and animates evolution. So what I find very interesting, and I also love in Andrew's teaching, that there is an absolute component that drives the manifest world, or that drives the growing up, that drives the structure stages. And what I find interesting to see in myself, but also in other people, there are two distinct awakenings that can happen. And one is to being, And some people just awaken to being, and that's beautiful and fulfilling. And I think some people also just wake up to becoming. But I have seen people waking up to becoming and actually have this visceral sense of God, of the evolutionary impulse coming through them as this energy that has created the whole universe and all the universes. And for us, this is kind of the first step, this awakening to that energy, to then be in service to that energy. And then we totally connect again, and then live a life that has purpose and meaning, and is here. It's a bodhisattvic life, a life for the sake of the whole, for humanity, for the world, where we are in service of something higher.
Awesome. So I'm delighted that I didn't anticipate that we would open a space so deep so fast, but I'm delighted to go there. And it's exciting. It's exciting for me to explore with you all. So first of all, I want to be respectful in that I think I have an understanding of where the teachings and tradition that I come from have something very, very deeply aligned with what you're describing, but I also I don't want to presume, and I want to hold space for difference, where difference is the healthy thing. That's my disclaimer before kind of jumping in.
Sure.
So Daniela, I feel like what you're speaking to is really actually the deep place that you and I meet as well, which is this the passion for the evolutionary impulse, which is an expression of the one, and it's such an exhilarating place to surrender to. It's such an exhilarating reality to give ourselves to. And so the way I would understand this in the background that I come from, so you heard me mention before the different levels of the human being on a relative sense: personality, soul, spirit. Another way that we talk about the spirit aspect is what we talk about the monad. And the monad is basically a depth of our being which is understood essentially to be a ray of the absolute ground and infused with the divine will and purpose of the entire evolutionary process. And that divine will and purpose it's described as electric fire. It's described as a current of pure life. And it's described that the monad, that depth of our being, has never left awakening, right? So whilst my personal self, as it was born into the world and has been through its kind of, oh my God, who am I and what am I doing here? And how can I find my place? And is it even okay for me to be here? Is, whatever. There's a level of separation that is inherent in the personality structure that we all go on a journey around, right? And you could say in the tradition that I come from, in the soul level, that separation is much more permeable. There's much more of a sense of being part of an interconnected field of intelligence and wisdom and synchronicity and love. And then that level deeper still, the monadic layer, is understood to basically operate within the absolute, and it's within a absolute, but as an expression of its electric will, purpose, creativity, life force. And so part of the work that I come out of, there's a deep exploration of that. Actually, my teacher, Bruce Lyon, that's really been the centerpiece of the entirety of his life work, has been that focus, going into that. And we have an understanding that yes, there have been human beings who, that is an opening to that depth of our being is a natural part of the evolutionary process that has been something that has opened in saints and sages, and beings on the path of awakening through time. And we have an understanding that is coming online much more collectively at this time in history as part of a larger evolutionary process, and more people are coming online with that. We also have our corresponding version of, one of the things my adventurous kind of spiritual seeking self has just always, had my just salivated and had my mouth water as I've come into contact with, Andrew's teachings on the radicality that is necessary to make ourselves available to this energy. And we have our own version of that same radicality, where even though, basically the point I'm making is that even though a stable expression of that, I will call it monadic energy, is something which is an advanced thing, it is possible, we could say, for anyone on the path to really bring that online within themselves if they choose to live in a way which evokes it. If they choose to give themselves to a life which is 100% dedication, 100% surrender. If they choose to put them to adopt a posture of living which makes that the centerpiece, and that's the piece on their altar, and they're willing to give themselves, to everything. They're willing to put everything on the altar to make themselves available to that energy living through them. So that's
beautiful, Jon, and that's such a match also with Andrew's teaching, in the sense that Andrew's so-called first tenet says, I want to be free more than anything else, and that's the same as you just described. It needs the full and 100% or 200% commitment to spirit, and to want to live this life, and to want to surrender to that energy that drives the whole process. And then what is very interesting, and I'm sure there is again kind of an overlap with your teachings, this energy then ideally meets an individual, a relative self, or as we call it, a positive ego that is as developed as possible. So in Andrew's teaching, nowadays, he makes the distinction between negative ego and positive ego. Negative ego being all the contracted selves, the traumatized selves, the victimized self, whereas the positive ego is the well-developed individual that is self-confident, that is spiritually self-confident, and that is actually capable to hold this energy that you just so beautifully described, this fiery energy that wants to go forward, and that is creating all the time without break. And it takes a strong person to actually be able to, I wouldn't even say contain that energy, because you cannot contain the energy, but to be a vehicle for that energy.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% on the same page. I think this is in the Trans-Himalayan teachings. This is why there's an understanding that one cannot actually become a fully stable vehicle for that energy until there's a level of integration between soul and personality to be able to hold it, and for actually the whole vibration of the being to be raised, essentially to be able to hold it. And I think that's one truth. And the other truth I've sensed is there are certain points on the path where we can say yes to this in a way that will determine, at the very least, the next phase of our journey. And there is a subtle but very significant dimension to that choice, because if we say yes to this from a place where actually we've got all sorts of really challenging areas of our personality structure, and areas where I'm locked in shadow and moved by trauma and still kind of, acting out my stuff. And if I say yes to this from that place, I need to be honest and sober about the reality that means it's probably going to come through me with a bunch of distortions. And so there's a dimension of this of like, well, actually, I need to do my work. I need to do my healing work. I need to do my integration work, so that as, if I'm simultaneously really giving myself to a posture of dedication and surrender and saying yes to this, that it's going to come through a vehicle which is as clean as possible. And this is one of the reasons, to be honest, Daniela. I mean, this is I feel the affinity between the work that I've been involved in and Andrew's work. And it's one of the reasons I feel deep sympathy for Andrew as well, from, around some of the that has been around him, because the truth is, in my experience, I was not part of those moments. There's a lot that I don't know, but I know the level of intensity that is necessary for breakthrough into this. I know that we have to be willing to go to the edge and beyond anything that we've known so far to be available to something, for this energy to actually come online through us. And so there's a level of availability to breakthrough and intensity, which is part of the practice, that it's not about human selves feeling safe and comfortable.
No, I totally agree. And isn't it also so encouraging that it's actually possible to awaken to that energy without having to wait until we have perfected ourselves? I find that a very, very encouraging. While I agree with everything you said, that if and when you awaken, you have to be even more diligent to see all the places where you as the vehicle are not pure or not pure enough. But on the other hand, I find it endlessly compelling to know that this awakening is possible in every single moment. The immediacy of the potential is mind-blowing. There is actually nothing to wait for. If our commitment is there, if the yes is there full-heartedly, there is nothing in the way. And that is something that I find so liberating for myself, but also as a message for everybody that thinks there is something to achieve first before I'm worthy to wake up. And actually, we are all worthy to wake up if we want it, if we give our lives to spirit, to God.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. And I think my experience has been that it really, truly is a matter of availability. It really, truly is a matter of how available am I making myself? How available am I making myself for this? And if I'm pursuing all kinds of personality motivations, if I've got a good dose of my energy that's just really, invested in, well, I really want the Porsche, or if I've got a good dose of my energy that's just like, oh my God, I need to achieve that kind of status in my employment life, and so much of my energy is really in that, then I'm not truly available for it. And and there's all kinds of versions of that. There's spiritualized versions of that, where, if I hit, ascension level 10 in my belief, in my whatever my new age kind of project is, or whatever. And I think the way when I was doing a lot of work around monadic energy, a way I would try to share it with people at the beginning would be to say, well, look, often we're not told what's on the spiritual menu, but actually there is a menu, and you can choose, really can choose what you choose to align yourself with. And people take different paths, and some people take a path that's really deeply going into opening to the sacred dimension of their embodiment, and and that's a whole path. And some people go deeply into expanding their consciousness and downloading energy and information and having all sorts of insights and so on, and connecting to their oversoul and things. That's a path. It's a legit path, and some people go into the traditional radical awakening path. It's an extraordinary legit path. And there's another path, at least one. There's more, and there is a path, which in the teachings that in the Trans-Malayan system, there's one sentence that this master says that is available to those who take the direct path of the heart. And I've always loved that. And for me, it's not, that's not just the heart of the beloved or the heart of loving. It's like, no, it's a posture of living. The path of the heart in that regard is a posture of living. It is a way of, it's recognizing that actually beyond my Porsche agenda or my spiritual agendas or whatever, there's an extraordinary game that we're a part of, that actually there's an extraordinary process where, the most sacred, soul-shatteringly sacred, heartbreakingly sacred reality is exploding to itself moment to moment in a ever unfolding breaking through to, realities that have the potential to transform us in ways that, just are beyond imagination, and we can participate. That it's possible.
We are called to participate.
Yeah,
exactly. But let me ask you a question. How do you in your school cultivate the capacity in people to actually come to this full yes, or to this full commitment? Or because I see again and again people very inspired by this path, but it seems to be very, very difficult to come to the place where you actually have this full, doubtless yes. It has to do with spiritual confidence. It has to do with doubtlessness about the truth of the path and the truth of what we're describing here, and probably with other components. And I often wonder what more we can do to help.
Yeah. I've spent a lot of time with this question myself as well. I feel like there has to be, the way I think about it sometimes is the surrender switch in the soul must be pushed. Like the surrender switch in the soul must have gone. And I observe that when that happens, and that's not something that can just be done in a workshop necessarily. It's not something we can't do a consciousness exercise right now to have everyone just press the surrender switch in their soul. It's something deep, and it's something at a core level that there's something, and very subtle. Maybe it's something that, the way I say it is that yes, the yes that we're talking about right now, in my background, that can only be said by the soul. It can only be said by that depth in us that is that naked, that honest, that sincere, that simple. We all know, we all have an intuition that there are places in us that we can make choices that affect our lives. They're not loud and bright or whatever, but we know that sometimes we're connected to a place in us which is so core, even if it's so core that when we say yes there, that yes ripples through time and space, because it is from a place in us that is naked and vulnerable and real and means it with everything that we have. And my experience is that just happens sometimes for people, and there is some people get to a point where something in them intuits the truth of this, that this really is true, and this really is a choice that they can make, and they want life. They want life more than they want anything else. That's another teaching in the teachings that I come out of, where it says that at a certain point, having our life moved by this energy becomes more magnetically attractive than anything else, including the cost, including the pain that may come with it, and so for me, we do a lot of work around consent, in a certain way. We've done a lot of work around, because people, in my experience, often have a superficial yes. There can be, we have these conversations and everyone gets amped up, and it's just like, oh God, yeah, that's what, let's go, right? And then when we hang out with that yes a little longer, then we realize, actually, wait a minute.
Yes, but,
and then there come the parts that are afraid. And because, again, in the teachings that I come out of, it's said that when this energy comes online in our life, it's not more light and love necessarily. It can be a force of life and death and destruction and reorganization and opening and vitalization of that which really can carry the energy and the current of the new phase of our life. So, to be really honest with you, something that we've experienced in our community, there have been several of us who've been through versions of this. I've been through it myself, that something that has sometimes followed people saying a deep and true and real yes has been times of real hardship in their life, and health crises, and unexpected, really intense challenges. And it's been, for those people, including myself, really scary and challenging. And for all of those people I know have felt remarkably freer on the other side of navigating whatever that was, And so we joke about there being, we have to be honest about the warning on the label here, we're talking about spiritual fire here. And this is a real thing. And it is exhilarating and vulnerable to live this. And so I think there has to be a real consideration of consent that happens in people, and you say yes when you're really ready to say yes. And I think we spend time as well with a real honoring of the no, because an understanding that if there are parts of me that if there are parts deep in my core that are like, yes, this is what I'm here to live. And then there are also parts of me that are like, absolutely not. I'm a no to that. There's an intelligence in that no. Like the intelligence in that no is that there's parts of me that haven't unfolded themselves in the way that they need to yet. That's the healthy side. The unhealthy side can be that there's parts of me that are just addicted to my separate self project and, don't want to give themselves up to something deeper to operate through. And so there needs to be a kind of, a conscious discernment around, if there are places in me that are a no to this, what is that? Is there something in me that actually just is asking for more unfolding in life, so that when it is more fully expressed, there's a natural surrender to a deeper principle? Or is it the case that actually I'm just addicted to, whatever my separate self project is in this or that dimension, and I don't want to give it up? And but
isn't it also tricky? I mean, this question I find extremely tricky, and my assumption is that we probably here in Manifest Nirvana lean a little bit more towards the side that would say it's the small self that says no, and it's best to not listen. But I totally hear you in what you are saying. I think it's very tricky, and it could well be that a person is just not ready yet. But I clearly can say that we probably tend, Andrew and all of us tend to think there is a value in just not listening to the doubting voice. And once the yes is kind of established or is very close, because in my own experience, the no gets louder the closer the yes is. You know what I mean? Like there is a process you go through where you feel like the yes is very close. And in my own experience, then the no also got much louder. And I have seen that in many people around us. And that's also interesting to see. And I don't think that kind of no is the no that actually knows better that we are not ready yet. It's just a visceral no of the separate self that doesn't want to give up the small self freedom of doing whatever he or she wants. Did we lose Jon?
Yeah, it seems like,
Yeah.
Let's wait a minute.
Yeah, I'm sure he will come back.
He's back.
Signal was disrupted. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You were saying that
Can you hear me? Jon, can you hear me? Vincent, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yeah.
I'm not sure what's going on there, but you were saying sometimes this happens when there's too much current. You were saying
when there is too much current?
When there's too much current, yeah, when these conversations get too close to that current, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
But you were saying when someone is very close to their yes.
Yes, I was making the point that my own experience, the closer you get to the yes, the louder the no gets too. And I'm making kind of a counterpoint to your point that the no probably could be valuable and important. And I think that's totally true. And there is also this other way to look at where you can see that, oh, the no actually is probably the no of the small self that just doesn't want to surrender. And I mean, I do believe in the resistance of ego that actually never wants to be free. So the freedom, the longing for freedom comes from a deeper place, from a soul or whatever our deepest place is. And the ego just doesn't want to do it anyway.
I would agree with that. I think where I've come to with it has been trust. That actually, and I feel like that has matured in me as I've been through my own cycles of saying yes, and then having really challenging things move in my life sometimes, and then feeling myself remarkably freer on the other side. And where I've come to, and it's like my yes now, my yes in the past was more passionate and intuitive, and yes, this feels so true to me. Yes. My yes now, it has the same energy, but it's also more educated, I feel, because it's like I've been through some processes, and I remember as I came out of one cycle of that, especially now having a child who's in his young years and so on, I remember there was a period of time where I was like, well, actually, I want to be, I know I'm due a next yes, you know, for the next phase. And I want to be careful with that. Like, I want to actually just feel like, am I really available for that? Because I know this is real. I know that there can be, you know, just life and death can move through my life. And, you know, so, and where I came to with it was, well, actually, yes, I know that's true. And I trust that whatever comes, whether it's life, whether it's death, whether it's beginnings, whether it's endings, it will bring what needs to come.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's where I've arrived at with it. And there's certain principles, I guess I've been kind of hovering around my own version of certain principles of what is necessary in this practice. You know, I think purity of motive is one. Like that's something that Andrew has enunciated really beautifully. Like the purity of our motive to say this yes, because I've also noticed, as you might, sometimes I've had people in my spaces where they've, you know, their yes is coming more from a place of, hey, Jon, I've heard that maybe you've got an escape route here, and I'm really hurting. Maybe if you could just give me
I want to get out of here.
I want to get out of this whole thing, you know. So if you can help me out, that would be great, you know. And that is not the kind of purity of motive that we're talking about. You know, the purity of motive that I'm talking about is the parts of us that know that there is a life possible for us on the other side of a certain death that we would never know otherwise. And we want that life in our soul and that's deeply connected to what we're here for and our ability to serve, you know. So purity of motive is one. Trust is absolutely another. Trust that whatever comes, life, death, destruction, new beginnings, reorganization of our life, whatever comes, it will bring what's right. You know, but it will probably just bring it faster than would otherwise be the case, you know, and certain other principles as well.
Exactly. And then I would add to that, not blind trust. And I'm sure you don't mean blind trust, but trust that actually then a response to life, like in Andrew's teaching, the realize and respond is a big thing. Like you want to realize, you want to wake up, you want to be connected to that energy and then respond. There is still agency that is needed from us. It's not a surrender that is just believes in destiny and everything will be good. And I know you don't mean that, but I just want to really voice it that it's an active surrender. It's a surrender and respond, surrender and be available for service. Yeah. And it's never about myself. It's never about me. It's always for the greater good, for the sake of the whole.
Yeah, absolutely. It's said in our teachings that it's the extremity of the soul in service that calls forth this. It's the extremity of the soul in service. So it's basically that the soul has gone to the very edge of its capacity to show up in service of, It's not just I want some energy to come online and break open my personal life so that I feel freer. It's,
yeah.
And the surrender is actually done in the language we work with, that it's done at a high point of spiritual tension.
Yeah.
So that's not,
yeah.
That's not emotional tension. That's not, I'm really emotionally activated. It's soul tension. It's, I'm willing to go to the edge of everything that I know and offer myself as a vehicle in service for life, to break through into greater expressions of itself through the humble circumstances of my life. And it's a surrender that is an act of will,
exactly,
rather than a surrender that's a release of will in a certain way.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, in what you were describing, this, how did you say this high energy surrender? I was thinking, and that's where, for me, also the role of the guru comes in, or of the teacher, where this tension to the higher in terms of the guru, it plays a very essential role, because the guru pulls you up there to that space that is not comfortable anymore, where, and that's the space, in my experience, where this, I like your term of the soul switch, actually can be switched. When the tension is vibrating, and you have to take a decision, and you want to take a decision, and then that yes comes from a very deep heart, and it's just so beautiful.
And I'm just aware, as we're having this conversation, Daniela, like there's so much of what we're discussing is edgy, pretty edgy in the kind of contemporary spiritual landscape, right?
Oh yeah.
Where we're in a landscape that is so dedicated to humanity finally having safe spaces, and and that's completely legitimate and right and needed, and I had a conversation with one of my closest friends in our kitchen the other night, where she was saying, yeah, but I think we're really past this whole thing of people trying to force breakthroughs, don't you? No.
No,
absolutely not.
Oh, it's so good to hear that. No,
I think it's really important that we honor all of these perspectives. Like what we're talking about is a particular way, and it's, in my view, there is a way that it will become relevant to everyone at a certain point, and there's also a truth where it is a particular way among other ways, and other incredible, fully legitimate way. And also, I kind of joke sometimes that for those of us who are doing this work, and this is what we're leaning into, it's even more important that we take really, really good care of our bodies, and that we take really, really good care of our hearts, and that we're really gentle with ourselves in certain ways, and caring and soft with ourselves. Because actually, if we're trying to lean into handling, divine electricity here in a certain way, then I want to take care of myself at the same time, not just an overindulgence in my separate self, but because actually I want to honor the vehicle's capacity to hold what I'm trying to lean into. So we can get burnt in this. That's another thing I observe, which is that I feel like in the first journey for myself into this kind of energy, I noticed that I wasn't integrated or balanced, and I felt like I felt like I got fried a little, and I needed to do a lot of integration work and personal healing work and connection to other parts of myself, which my body, my feminine, my trauma work, my healing, to actually have a more integrated vehicle that could be available to this life in a way where I didn't get burnt in the same way. So
yeah, I do think that this is very important, but I think the big difference that I appreciate is that we can look into all these personal development activities from the relative, like do the personal development to then get to whatever we want to achieve, or, and that's my preference, we look from the other side. We want to say awakening first. We want to awaken, and then we want to look, and we want to see, and hopefully we see a little clearer, and we probably see a little clearer with the help of the Sangha. We see a little clearer with the help of the Guru. And that's where I also love the natural hierarchy, or any kind of hierarchy that actually can help us to grow when it's healthy, but from the awakened place, not from the contracted place, not from the place of lack, from the place of victimization, but from the awakened place where we can actually see what is in the way. And then some things probably are not so important as the small self thought it was, and others are very important, and we have to work on them, and we have to do the work to purify ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm right there with you in the freedom first.
Freedom first, exactly. We have covered a lot. I'm just thinking. I am. That's more my curiosity, probably, for the last 5 minutes before we open for questions. What is your thinking about spiritual bypassing that lineages or teachings as ours often hear? When the moment you say freedom first, or awakening first, or transcendence first, there is a group of people that puts that into the box of spiritual bypassing.
Yeah, I guess I think there's a healthy version of that critique and an unhealthy version of that critique. I think the unhealthy version of that critique, if I start there, is a position that doesn't acknowledge that there are even, that there are core to even more core aspects of the human being that often get attention in our culture. And, for instance, one of the ways that we approach this kind of opening that you and I have been discussing is we talk about sometimes first things first, right? And so for instance, in the Trans-Malayan teachings, there's a whole kind of metaphysical model and so on, where the monad is described as the first aspect of our being, and then the soul second, and the material aspect the third aspect. And so sometimes when we talk about, hey, first things first, it means that actually there's a greater possibility for my being really being in alignment and coherence if I put that piece first. And that isn't a no to who I am as a soul on my unfolding journey, or who I am as an embodied personal self. It's not saying no, but it's putting first things first, and saying actually that there's a greater possibility for coherence and alignment in my whole life if I do that. And the unhealthy version of the bypassing critique is, actually look at where having a world where we put each of our own, personal self journey first. Look at where that's got us. So we have a global hyper individualized culture where everyone's dream is the me project, finally fulfilling the me project, so into its ultimate, kind of success and achievement and status. And whilst the earth, is feeling the suffering of that, and whilst we have insane injustices and shadow and terrible tragic things happening on the planet because we're all looking the other way, so first things, that's what I'd say about the unhealthy version of that critique. I think the healthy version is we human beings are only just crazily, we are only just realizing how incredibly traumatized we all are, and how much we've traumatized ourselves and each other for millennia through of not knowing how to be loving, not really knowing how to love ourselves and love each other. And that's a sacred principle too. And sometimes people's interest or fascination with the kind of thing that we're talking about here comes from a place that has a really strong sense of identity and spiritual ego. That's also possible, where there's a huge thing of, wanting the Enlightenment project, or wanting to be a big energy in the world, or just wanting to have some, as I said before, some escape from actually the fact that I've got really uncomfortable, painful feelings in my belly and in my body if I hang out there. So there is a truth also to make sure you have a self that you can just that you can be good with, you know,
Yeah.
and
I totally agree.
Don't just relegate that to something that isn't important, because it really is.
Yeah.
But
No,
also
that's absolutely
make
true.
that, but don't make that the be all and end all, because there's so much more that's possible for us, and actually sometimes maybe we get it backwards when we try and put that first, you know.
Yeah. And then I also believe that sometimes it's also misunderstood. Teachings like ours, the way I understand yours and definitely ours, evolution enlightenment, was never a bypassing teaching. It's always about awakening to be a better human being. That's all there is. So you always want to take it back into our relative being and how we express ourselves. And I love when Andrew again and again tells us that it's not about where we think we are at, it's about how we show up in the world. Look at somebody and see how he or she acts, and then you see how spiritually evolved she or he actually is. And if you don't see it, I don't care what the internal experience is of that person. If she cannot show up as a decent human being with a decent conscience and morality and ethics, then it's not what the world needs right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that connects me to another dimension of the kind of awakening that we're speaking about, which is, I feel it's important to mention, which is that this isn't just an opening that happens on the meditation cushion. You know, we're talking about something that claims our life, that wants to, you know, when this energy comes online in us, it wants to consume and take our life. And that means our outer life too. It means, you know, people who are overflowing, people who come into contact with this type of current and life force, it wants to come alive through how we live, through how we love, through how we relate, through how we work, through how we serve. You know, and it will demand that. It will demand it is expressed in our outer life in a form of passionate engagement with the evolutionary process that we're collectively a part of. So, you know, that's sometimes I have noticed that is really scary for people, and it's you know, it is scary. Because I mean, this is for a lot of people, it's really scary to connect to something that's about, okay, this is going to drive me actually out into the world to take a stand for something, to take a stand for us and the deepest in us and where this wants to go, even if I'm living in a world which is hostile to often the deeper principles that spiritual development is focused on. Yeah,
and it's also an energy that wants to take me out of my comfort zone. I cannot stay where I am comfortable. It's getting out there and show up and actually surrender and be surprised what comes on the other side of the surrender. Like in my case, you wake up and live in Tiruvannamalai of all places, which is wonderful.
I just want to say, like, you know, it's such a pleasure for me to be in contact with a whole community of people who are not my community, who are orbiting this whole stuff, you know. And it's one of the reasons that I've, for years from a distance, just looked on at Manifest Nirvana and Andrew's work and your work, Daniela, and just felt a real kind of fellowship and thank you. Oh, good. There's other people out there who are holding a point for this too, and because it's rare. It's actually,
it's very rare.
I don't think I know, and maybe I'm just, you know, maybe I'm just not super educated or aware, but I don't think I know another community out there that's holding point for this as well, you know. So
no, I agree.
It's a rare thing.
And it's such a breath of fresh air. I mean, I agree with you. I feel exactly the same. It's so rare, and you feel so close. Like we don't have the same lineage, the same teacher, and it's just the truth that is resonating through both of us and all of us.
Yeah, there's a profound intimacy. I noticed that the first time I ran in a retreat focused on this. I noticed it because we like to go to the Egyptian desert. That's a place for us that we feel very connected to this type of work. And I noticed in that retreat, I was like, oh, you know, there's a way of bonding for people in embodied events where they have beautiful, deep embodied experiences with each other and they feel very close to each other, and that's beautiful. And there's a way of bonding for people in events focused on love and consciousness, where they have beautiful openings with each other and so on. But there's a different type of intimacy to this.
Yes,
and it's
I agree.
I noticed it's the intimacy of, it can be two people who just make eye contact from different sides of the room, and they both know the abyss that each other is standing at. And it's like the sweetness and the intensity of that, of feeling, what it means to the courage and the vulnerability and the exhilaration of getting that close to life. I love that.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much. Shall we open for a few minutes for a few questions, if there are? So if you have any questions, please write them in the chat box, and then I will get them, or Vincent will, and we can read them out loud. And
yes. And thank you, Daniela and Jon. Yeah, it's beautiful dialogue. And we have a first question from Patricia, and I share also the message to you, Daniela, because it's good to read it. So it's related to the small self and saying no to it. So the question is, what do Daniela and Jon say no to? For example, what have they negated to get to a bigger yes?
Shall I give it a go, Jon?
Yeah, go for it.
Because I think I was talking about the saying no to the small self. I think my strongest sense is it's saying no to the doubting voices. Once you have had a flavor of the opening of awakening, you probably have had experiences, and you have had real openings to the oneness that we are talking about here, either in being or in becoming. And then you kind of come down from that state experiences, and then you come down from that state experience again, and that goes on and on for a few times, and you have the experience, and then the experience fades again. I think the big yes has to do with the fact that you become state independent, that you don't need more experiences to say yes, and that you resist, to your question, Patricia, that you resist the temptation to listen to the small self voices that doubts the experience, that doubt the truth of what you yourself have experienced and know to be true. There is this small voice that, when the experience is not active right now, tries to make you doubt that it ever was real. And to develop spiritual self-confidence means to be doubtless about the truth of your own experience, of the reality of that depth dimension, and just not doubt it, even if the experience right now is not one of awakening or enlightenment in yourself. And then just resist the small self's no, and the small self spot, and the small self's doubtless voice, or doubtful voice.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I haven't really had so much difficulty with that. Just on a day-to-day basis, what you said resonated with me, that the deeper I go, the more the self resists, the small self resists. And it comes at me in all sorts of subtle ways. And perhaps one of the ways that it's coming at me at the minute is it seems to split itself and have conversations within me, and imaginary situations. I mean, I probably know now how to deal with it in terms of just becoming more aware of it and just breathing it away, because it's not the truth for me. So really, yes, it was what you said about the resistance of the self.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that very strongly from the very outset of my journey inwards. It's attacked me, and it seems to get stronger as I get closer to being freer.
Jon, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, sure. I think a place I've come to with this is that there is a stage by stage process that's possible for us in working with this kind of surrender. And if I speak to my own kind of favorite version of that path, my own favorite version of that path is to start with, is there a place in me that, regardless of whatever other parts of me, regardless of their relative levels of healing or trauma or, coherence or not, there's something in me that is just passionately here to be lived by the all. And my view and experience in being in lots of different spiritual spaces over time is that actually probably the thing that unites everyone in various kinds of explorations is that we all deeply want life. We want to come alive, and we want to be lived by something greater than ourselves. And maybe we're afraid of that, but there's something in us that longs to come online and be lived by something greater than ourselves. And I know for myself, that was, the core of my surrender is I want to be lived by the all. I would look in the mirror sometimes in the morning and be like, well, hi, Jon, I love you, and I want so much more than you. I'm here for so much more than you. I love you, Jon, and, so step one, that having that kind of, I'm here for life and to be lived by life. And that means that this is the core driver of my practice and where I'm living from. Step two is, okay, and I realize I'm an ecosystem of different parts and voices, and some of those parts might feel aligned with that yes, and some of those parts might feel a hell no. And then how do I relate with those? And my personal approach there is based on the principle that healthy sovereignty leads to surrender. So, and that works for parts of us as well. So when a part of me has had enough attention and support to express itself and to express itself to a point of fullness, its healthy move is to naturally want to surrender and to be lived by a deeper principle. So how can I be, and so then the practice for me is, how can I be a yes to that core drive to actually just be radically open by life? And how can I be a yes to the parts of me that say no, to give them the time and the attention to unfold and express themselves so that they then are available to a deeper surrender. And my view is that process of working with the ecosystem of our different parts leads us to an increasingly more whole yes. So more and more over time, more and more of the whole of us is, yes, I'm available for this. And that leads ultimately to the place where this becomes everything. That's my experience.
Thank you very much, Daniela and Jon. You've both answered the question for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have so it's more a comment on an experience from Adam, but it's related to what you just shared. And I think you answered to this comment. And another comment is from Ananda saying, so beautiful.
Thank you, Ananda.
And we don't have other question yet.
Great. Do you have any final comments, Jon? Anything you would like to say, to add? I really appreciated this conversation. It's delightful.
Yeah, I just love that there's people out there, orbiting this. I just love that, and yeah, I really feel a deep sense of gratitude and appreciation to Andrew for what he has pioneered, and also gratitude and appreciation to you, Daniela, for what you've stood for and continue to stand for. And yeah, I know the intensity of the kind of path that we have been speaking about, and I think it's really important that people have Sangha when they are orbiting this, that, you know, they can have people to be in connection with around the vulnerability and the exhilaration and the fears and the intensity and the challenges of what it means to try and live in this way. So I think it's beautiful that this exists.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming, and see you next week. Thank you so much. Vincent, do we have a little bit of music? Yeah. Thank you, Jon.